welcome to another episode of the 100 Year Podcast. My name is Dario Strange, and this week we have a very special guest, Harry Yeff, aka Reeps One, hailing from the UK, and I would say he's probably on the cutting edge of using artificial intelligence to create. First of all, hello, Harry. How you doing?
Very good. The sun is shining here in London, so I can't complain too much.
What listen now, I visit London quite often, and one of the things that really impresses me about London is it's almost always the art community is almost always on the cutting edge. So I'm not surprised that you decided to embark upon creating a performance work using generative AI to influence pretty much everything. Can you just really quickly before we get into and the work is called Fusion and it's kind of ongoing right now. But before we get into that, just give us an idea of who you are. Because when I found out about you, I was fascinated. I have a previous career in the music industry, and we might get into the hip hop discussion a little bit. But I'm just give me a sense of who you are and what your background is.
Yeah, so I grew up in a rough part of East London. My parents were neurodivergent, I'm neurodivergent, and it basically was, with all good intention, it was chaos. And that lack of structure, I think, led to a lot of creativity. It was actually through music and through art that I found a sense of control and a sense of ownership over my environment. Um, and most importantly, the human voice. So I was born like a lot of like early dubstep, early grime, like really heavy, dark electronic music culture in London. When my friends were producing, I started to channel that through my voice. So finding vocal techniques, making sounds, like developing beats, being a big part of early beatbox culture. But it was never actually a hip hop direction. It was always the London like electronic sound. But alongside that, I was also a tournament chess player. So this idea of working with AI and having an engine that tests you and pushes you, I had a relationship with that from the age of 14. It was nothing new, the idea that a system could be better than you at something or yeah, open new lines of thinking and inquiry. So as I developed as an artist and as I got more and more opportunities, any chance to use technology to enhance my voice, that just felt like a very natural connection. So I went on to tour globally. It then led to a series of voice academic partnerships. I did guest lecturing at Harvard University, went on to Bell Labs and have partnerships with the UN and WEF. But the main thing is how can technology enhance and push the human voice, and how can we use the human voice to understand technology? A very untraditional, unexpected path, but I think that's what creativity is all about, is new ideas, and that's what I try to live and breathe.
Amazing. So one thing I remember when I was kind of like researching your background, and I saw Harry F, aka Reeps One. When I heard Reeps One, the first thing I thought of was kind of like the old graffiti artist. Like that's the first thing that came to mind. And I know you said you were like less in the hip hop realm and more kind of like in the dubstep electronic realm. But I still have to ask you, like, do you consider yourself in the lineage of, I guess, like Dougie Fresh, Biz Markie, and even like a Bobby McFerrin from the jazz world, who is like a very renowned, vocal experimentalist.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Because I think that's the important thing about, I guess, a lot of not just beatbox culture, but voice. Like, it's a global phenomena, and you have that hip hop lineage. But then, if you start thinking about like traditional experimentalism in like early jazz, like multiphonic singing through the buzzing of the lips to create harmonics from yourself, Tuvan throat singing, like vocal ceremony. I think the real thing is that there's a cluster of experimental vocalists out there, and a huge branch of that would be the OGs of beatbox culture. But even like artists like Mike Patton, who have such a crazy, wonderful range, but there's this puzzle in that world where everyone has a human voice. You would think that that would be something covered and established, where even to this day, there are new ways of using a voice that are being discovered. And it's almost like if you imagine someone finding a new way to move their body universally. And what I love about voice, like whether it's hip hop culture, experimental, avant-garde, openness. There's this puzzle to unlock that is the human voice, and it really feels like it's not fully charted. It feels like there is new potential and new ability and new amounts of control. And I'm deeply, deeply in love with that challenge. And not just from my perspective and what I can do. I just observing, collecting, understanding the world's voices is a lifelong mission, love, passion, whatever you want to call it. And I love how mysterious it can be sometimes. So those OGs are a huge part of the journey. But vocal music and sound making is just is pre-music, it's pre-language. There's not really anything that's older.
Yeah, and I think the thing that really fascinated me about your project with Fusion is that when I think, again, to go back to hip hop, I'm a b-boy. I was, graffiti, breakdance, DJing, everything, rapping, everything. When I think of what's happening now, I kind of think back to the days of early sampling and how that was looked upon as, by some traditional musicians, as not really music. And, what are these collages? What are these sound collages you're building? Like, why should we pay attention? And I probably should write something about this. I do think there's connective tissue, between the, hip hop culture that was, fundamentally driven by technology, like a lot of the aspects of it, even from just, graffiti. That was, that wasn't, painting. That was like a form of technology. There was technology involved, DJing, everything. And so I feel like we're kind of on the cusp of like a new form of art where just creative minds seamlessly blend AI into their creative process. And it seems like that's what you did with this work Fusion. Can you just give us like a broad outline of like what Fusion is and like how you led up to it, like what got it started?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I composed and performed with voice for quite some time. But then about 5 or 6 years ago, I started doing a lot more creative direction and directing. So being trusted to come in and really experiment with voice, whether it's in a gallery space or in an institution, or just being given something that is emerging to think about. And in 2019, I was performing at a festival called Ars Electronica, where I had a real-time AI duet with a synthetic version of my own voice. It's one of the systems that we developed. So as I performed, there was this kind of sonic chess match of back and forth, and in the audience was Mario Schroeder, who's the ballet director and lead choreographer at Leipzig International Ballet. So Leipzig Ballet is a 17th century ballet house. It's very, very traditional um, in Leipzig, which is a very traditional classical arts city. And he was very interested in who could they collaborate with as a conservative house to interrupt, not necessarily disrupt, traditional ballet. So me coming from an electronic music world, me experimenting with voice, experimenting with AI, we had nearly like a 2.5 year conversation about what would be a work kind of collaboratively directed between myself and Mario that would involve the 35 international dancers and would be a premiere at Leipzig. So that was announced, and the very first piece happened in just before the summer, like this year. And effectively, we approached the use of AI not in the sense of every single element was going to be a generative thing from the music or the dancing. What I was really interested in was to go into a traditional ballet house and actually give these tools to every single senior member of the creative team, from the set, from the dramaturgie, which is the script and the concept and the narrative, and encourage them to embrace it. So at every level of this work, which became an hour and a half sort of multi-sensory display, uh, it was a augmentation of traditional creative intelligence with the inspiration of an AI partner. So the work became something that would never have happened without that kind of partnership. And each individual had different levels where those systems were interwoven. So for me, it was very deeply interwoven. I had synthetic voice. I was using tools to map out composition. I was thinking of, well, what are new ideas using prompts, using sample RNN to generate breathing and very human um, artificial kind of content that I could bake into my musical composition for the work. But say someone like Paul Zoller, who's the set designer, was using simple prompts. So we would talk about the story and the narrative, and he was then generating inspiration, which he then used to create these huge set pieces. So there's been generative movement before, there's been AI choreography before, but it was all a prediction of future workflow. What we believe is what happened with Fusion to warmly embrace these systems, to stand on the shoulders of these systems. We were able to see further, and we think this will start to happen more and more and more and more. And uh, regardless of the narrative and the music and the composition, that part of it is why I think the world has paid attention, and we're very proud of the outcome.
So I have two questions. First, more technical, and then I guess art based. Technically, so earlier you said you had a performance where you trained an AI on your own voice, and you kind of went back and forth. So, and this is kind of like a big topic in the art world, that is training an AI on your own work, and then using that work, and it kind of almost being this recursive loop that you influence and control and direct in the way that you want. So in this case, like, is that what happened? Like, technically, like, did you guys use open source tools? Did you use off the shelf tools? And are we talking just audio? Like, what visual ask can you like describe the visual, generative AI process?
Yeah, for sure. So that system that I spoke about, this real-time duet, what we used was a recurrent neural network to generate like tens of hours of new phrases. So I made a data set of about 10 hours of me performing. So this was me speaking, it was me sound making, shouting, screaming, breathing. And I then had this incredible source material to then start using this very organic generative process with a bespoke model, which was collaboratively with DataBots, CJ Carr, who's an amazing computational artist. And I then, it was, what I loved about that experience was I've 30,000 hours performed and used. There's a lexicon that I've developed, right? There's phrases that I know. I know my tool, and then for the first time to start to hear these generative variations. So from this source data set, and also because sample RNN, it has this really organic process. Effectively, what it's doing is instead of say a predictive chess engine is predicting the next move in a chess game, sample RNN predicts the next millisecond of audio. So based on the source materials, you end up with this really beautiful layering, which leads to this thing. It sounds really organic and alive and human. So from that process, again, this thing that I'm very, very familiar with, I started to hear new ideas. I started to hear my voice used with new phraseologies. And when I started showing this to my contemporaries, what I got was universally negative. Like people were scared, they found it unwholesome, they found it creepy. And I just found that so interesting because I loved it. And there's a big difference between the observer on the outside who's seeing something, they had their archetype of me and what my voice is and what's mine and what I own. And then there's me, the person who spent 30,000 hours doing the thing, having this system experience and seeing these new ideas and thinking, wow, I see this as a spiritual experience. I see this as a wholesome experience. So for me, using these processes to then be very deeply, I'm very fascinated by how I can augment. Like I have certain techniques and certain phrases now that have directly come from that training, where someone like Paul Zoller, he really had a boundary. He didn't want to go further than just simple off the shelf APIs like tools, vGAN plus ClearUp and Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, to just inspire him visually. There was no like design, like three-dimensional model, like suggesting. So it's those are two examples of me going very like warmly embracing it to a really intimate level, and then certain individuals were thinking about just a single interaction generated a bunch of content, and then that led to sort of concept in the set. In the middle, you had people like Mario Schroeder, who's a choreographer, who already started to think about the movement and the story and what they were. So we started to take pictures. So we started to capture the movements that he designed, and then starting to use style GANs and uh, all the options we had to then generate new movements. So we weren't then pulling prompts out of the sky. You had all of these different ways to come at it, and I think that's the most important thing that people need to be very careful of. Is the anxiety is justified, the need for regulation is absolutely important. We'll talk about the fact that consent, regardless of what it is always necessary, but this is a higher dimensional, cross-modal creative process that can come in small forms, it can come in huge forms. And it's really up to us the level of depth of AI literacy we take on. And Fusion is really an example where that was universally embraced, and there's lots of unique individual case studies for the level of depth that people went into. So my prediction is 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, that will be very common. I think it will be almost essential that we have these second selves, these system kind of limbs that enhance our creative process. We're able to see things and behave in a way that is so powerful that it enhances the creative process. So
Fascinating,
that's a crash
fascinating.
course.
All right, so I only got a chance to. I'm obviously not in Germany, but I got a chance to look at just a brief portion of the performance, and so from an audio standpoint, I'm imagining that at least some of it is your voice and your voice kind of recombinated in using AI, but visually, um, I'm curious. Like, so are the choreographed movements, like you said, some of them you basically were able to kind of get Mario, or he was able to get inspired to kind of, I guess, come up with new ideas and new movements. So is that the extent of it, or is there a part of the performance, in Fusion, the performance, where we actually see some visual generative AI, or is it all kind of is the visual component all inspiration, or is there an actual tangible output on stage?
Yes, so the tangible outputs are in the outcomes, right? So Fusion is really focused on the process. It was about embracing these systems, but I'm really only ever interested in augmented intelligence. And what I mean by that is I don't see the function of replacing people. I don't see the function of having something that you use a prompt or you use a data set to make something that is so far removed from anyone involved. I mean, it can be incredible. I'll be sort of eating my own words if I said there's something that you shouldn't do. But just me personally, so there are sculptures and structures in the piece which actually fall from the sky. There's a moment when, like, I think it's like 150 sculptures like fall from the ceiling, and those shapes and those structures were directly inspired by like visual generative process. In the music and composition, there are many synthetic voices. There are singing voices, and there are pieces that some of the melodies I chose, others were based on this kind of augmented process that I take on, but the outcome is a human curated outcome. It's this idea of we're enhancing human creativity and not replacing, we're not automating or cutting corners. For me, it was really about you can through process see direct influences where I can show you a generative image which has come from a human prompt, but now it's a physical object like on stage, which I love that physical tangibility. Um, but it's an outcome-driven project, and the other interesting thing was the dancers themselves. You have to understand were not used to thinking like this. This idea that elements of their direction, that to be co-directed by individuals that are embracing systems that are thinking about what's going on, they found that very, very fascinating. So this idea of them actually taking on other characters or their body being moved in a way which is coming from the choreographer, but now there's some other ideas that are in between the lines. It becomes something new. So the answer is yes. You can directly reference like generative outputs, um, and but the direction, the goal, the aim, the dream is to have a case study of really beautiful augmentation where nothing is fully human and nothing is fully yeah generative or machine.
Okay, so I love the idea that you just brought up of augmented intelligence. This is something that I think will become more common in, general discussions of AI. And I do think, kind of it applies to the creative space. Right now, you have in Hollywood a big strike. The Writers Guild of America, they're striking for various rights and, kind of procedures in writing rooms. But one of the points that continues to get raised is the idea that they don't want, I guess, AI models trained on their work. They don't want scripts to be output, by AI. And what I'm seeing is kind of like some of the same, I guess, hysteria or concern or creepiness that you mentioned earlier. Kind of like in the early, I guess, music sampling days where people thought, okay, are we just going to output, an entire song that's just sampled, as opposed to understanding that it was the human working with the technology and it was an augmented human outputting work. So, if you could speak to just artists in general, be they audio, visual, text based, writers, like what advice, particularly let's say there's a creative writer, a young woman, somewhere in Barcelona. She's 18. She wants to be a novelist, but she's watching ChatGPT 4, which we know won't be static. ChatGPT will continue to, improve as all software does. What do you tell someone like her, at this point in terms of how do you embrace or confront or deal with, the tools as opposed to, I guess, staying mired in just like okay, I'm just a writer, a human writer, and that's all I'm going to do. Like, what do you say to her? Like, how do you give her a path forward?
So just to kind of address the Writers Guild, consent in any form is always paramount. I think people should have control over what they're contributing to. There should be transparency and visibility. And I can really respect the concern that many industries have now that if you're providing a creative service, it really is in question. And that has serious implications on those industries, on people's lives, on work. And it's a higher dimension than I'd say many of the innovations that have come before, because you're dealing with intelligence on tap. It kind of moves and breathes uh, in a way that is very different to say like a new tool. Or my father was a sign writer. He used to do special effects for films before computers, which is giving away his age. But he was made redundant by the first ever computers coming in to systems. So yes, there is this kind of repeated pattern, but I agree that this is slightly different. We have to be very careful. In the example that you gave of a young writer thinking about this, I would say that one of the plus sides of all this is we're moving into the age of vision. And what I mean by that is the real commodity isn't going to be how you do something or if you're able to, it's going to be the value of your vision. And if you think of like great novelists before, the amount of, which is a beautiful thing, the amount of discipline and focus and sacrifice it took to get a vision out. Now, these systems are allowing ideas, people that would never have the time or ability to be creative, your visions are able to pour out of you, and that is just going to increase more and more. So if you want to be a writer in the sense of you're doing copy proofing things like this, you're providing a service, you have to really think about, well, how can these things, like, what is my uniqueness, what is my difference in that market, and how am I using these things to speed up a process or enhance something, and staying aware of it, because it's like a literacy. You can decide, oh, I'm not interested, but it's very much here. But if you're creative, it's the most beautiful part of creativity is like there's aspects of your soul and interest and trauma and dreams that can now come out of you with a fluency that has never existed before. So what is the dream? What is the vision? What is the story? Like what you really, really care about? And ask or iterate that, explore it, talk to these systems to help that be pulled out of you. And I think that is the light side of the moon, and it's something that is very beautiful. And one thing I will say, we have no idea what's coming. Like there will be uh, there will be very very big concerns. These are very powerful systems, but oh my God, some beautiful art is going to come. The ability to behold and a new echelon of human creativity. If you take my word for it or not, and there's the anxiety or not, I'm so sure that this will elevate humans' capacity to a whole new realm. And when that happens and how, I will let you kind of explore. But I say that to that young person as a method of inspiration and a focus on the vision instead of the boring details.
Okay,
No,
so
that's a joke.
let's explore the dark side of the moon. So there's two things I want to kind of ideas I want to kind of pose to you. One is, I guess, and we kind of touched on this, on the podcast in the past. Just performance enhancing drugs in sports. Right now, they're kind of looked down upon. But we do know that when some athletes use these as tools to enhance their performance, we see amazing results. We see new kind of records broken, and there is some idea out there that what if we have kind of like this artisanal uh human output, and then kind of a label almost, oh, this has been assisted, in some way or augmented by AI. Do you think that's silly? Do you think that's realistic? Do you think we'll see a reality where that kind of delineation is made in the general like culture?
Mm. So, something that I do think will be a reality is in the same way that we consume food, we're very interested in where it comes from. Um, there's thousands of examples where something might be very profitable or taste good at the time, but now we think, yeah, like what is this doing to me? Where does it come from? What are the ingredients? So I think there is something very realistic about people in this kind of like post-human like augmented existence where we no longer what is human and what is machine. I think there'll be a real hunger to know, oh, was this ad made by human beings? Like, was this like this is an all human agency? Like, we only make content with human creativity. We don't use any systems. So I do think there might be like a regressive like counterculture to all the innovation where the kind of artisanal, human, organic creativity might be really respected, and it could lead to a whole new sort of genre of appreciation for the lack of tech or this, as you put it, these kind of system enhancing opportunities. Um, but I think what will be more common is, yeah, there will be concerns in something like sports. Obviously, especially combat sports, like people can really hurt another person if they are enhancing themselves. And you could say that if people are doing jobs in this enhanced way, they're hurting other people. But that's happening all the time anyway. In capitalism, as soon as innovation comes in, jobs come, jobs go, which would be the equivalent. So I think it's really fascinating to see how new cultures will really emerge out of this, like new kinds of appreciation for human creativity as a counterweight. But I think, yeah, the concern is very real. I think also if you're using these systems, what are you contributing to? So everyone that's using ChatGPT is currently training ChatGPT 5. Like there's a you're giving something that you're consenting to a gifting of your data and your knowledge, which is something that not a lot of people think about. So when you think about the dark side of the moon or limitations or things like that, I think it's more going to be about us. What do we want? What do we want to give? Are we given this like with an awareness of what it is, or are we doing it because this is interesting in the short term? So that I call it like AI literacy. I think the AI literacy will go up a lot more. People will realize that there is sadly not a choice whether you're interacting with these systems. Um, and finally, we're already very augmented. Like our phones have already become like an organ, digital kind of augmentation. So sometimes we think this stuff is totally new and like really a new realm of scary, or where actually there's a lot of this or indications of these things that are already very present in our behaviors, and we've already consented like to a lot of it. It just has a new name and a new package.
So I want to come back to the device part of what you just said, but staying on the dark side of the future for one more second. Let's think about, let's say, 10 years from now.
Mm.
Um, right now, a lot of us live primarily online. Many of us go outside and touch grass and see live performances and that kind of interact at bars and restaurants and everything. But there's a huge portion of the population that remains online, and the only person that is their username and their avatar. And I'm wondering about a future where some of these, the lines begin to blur, and some of these AI systems, particularly assistants, take on, I guess, some traits, that blur the line between, is this my buddy over in London, or is this the AI who lives who knows where? So, in the realm of art, I'm wondering if in the future, what if performance like fusion, well, fusion is kind of not a good example because it's kind of like inherently augmented, but let's just say a film or an album, or just let's say the Into the Spider Verse, chapter 8 was completely created from script to animation to marketing posters, no human hand. um and but the key being that an AI system, let's just call it Harry, not Harry, that you're Harry. Let's call it Henry. Okay. I think about Henry with AI often because of the old tale of John Henry, who battled the steam engine and ultimately, kind of succumbed. Um, let's say Harry, the AI system, or Henry, the AI system, becomes beloved and people love Henry, and Henry has fans, but we all know Henry is an AI system with no human involvement, and Henry decides to direct a film, produce an album. What then? What happens then? What Because it's clear that some of this artwork will be beautiful and will be consumable.
Mm. I mean, so what you're talking about there is a really, really important conversation where we move into an age of artificial beholdment. So what we're doing is we're no longer creating, we're basking in the and beholding what these systems are able to generate because they're trained and tapping into uh, choices of intelligence that we've decided are important and the human experience thinks is beautiful. But it's not impossible 10 years from now that I can write a prompt and an entire feature film will be generated bespoke for me by the time I sit down and decide to watch it. So you're, yeah, you're in liminal, latent sort of beholding. And that is, for me, I think is there's a lot about that that's hard. There's so many unknown unknowns, but the thing that concerns me, which is your question, is it becomes such a crutch of power because this level of expression can has the potential to be, just as I said, beyond anything that we expected. But there is an example now which suggests why that might not be a problem, which is actually in game theory and in chess. So in it's very common now. It's established that these yeah, things like AlphaZero, which is the world's strongest chess engine, is much stronger than Magnus Carlsen, who's the world's strongest chess player. And when these systems are playing themselves, or their level of play is so far beyond that even the best chess players in the world now sort of put their hands up in the air. There's no longer a connection. Like we're not here watching um, there's a huge chess culture now of streaming chess and watching chess and the chess world championships. We're not here watching the machines play, we're watching the human beings play. So I think there's something to be said for even if something excels or starts to get its own fabric of existence and it is something so totally artificial, 100% there's going to be washes of cultures and individuals that love that. There's going to be whole industries built off these systems. But there's a lot to indicate that people are still going to look for that human touch. And I think if you look at the gaming worlds and in games like chess, it sort of indicates that it's not as simple as better equals more, like more powerful equals good. And these systems are going to become better, they're going to become more powerful. But the human experience in the entertainment industry is everything. And I think you're going to need human beings loving what's happening to drive that engine. There's that next arc when these systems start maybe feeding themselves and looking for their own sort of adoration. But that's going into science fiction speculation.
I love the example you gave. I'm a chess player. I play
Hmm.
every day. A lot of people
Oh,
may not know
amazing.
this. I play every day. I know all about the Magnus Carlsen situation.
Okay, great,
I
great.
think people are still wondering if his opponent figured out some sort of, wireless way to cheat. And
Hmm.
I know he got kicked out of the association or whatever. Um, but yeah, I'm constantly thinking about the idea that what if to let first of all, I agree with this idea that the human struggle will likely remain you know uh, compelling to most of us. We still want to see that human struggle. But what would happen if we had a Magnus Carlsen with Hikaru Nakamura, and they both had their AI assistants? So it was not just the AI, but it was two chess grandmasters facing off with augmentations, kind of giving them nudges, and we might see a level of chess no one has ever seen before. I mean, it would get really, what do they call it, 4D chess, I guess from Star Trek, with Spock, um but yeah, I think that's a great example, particularly with gaming. In esports, you could just watch a bot play a magnificent game, of Call of Duty. But what a lot of esports fans want is they want to see that human struggle. This is why, the teams are sponsored and we see broadcasts. I mean, so I think that's a great point.
No, I will say though to that, because it's just relevant to why we're talking. So I would argue that we're already seeing a level of human play that we've never seen before. And so you would call Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru their centaurs. So a lot of their thinking and their theory is assisted by machines. Like they are augmented with the intelligence that's been revealed that has practical utility to the thing they're trying to do. So even though they're not sat there with an AI, as far as we know, they are already these augmented beings. The intelligence that they've achieved, which they would have no access to outside of these systems existing, has led to a new level of chess. And the reason that's very relevant is that's really fuels, again, my approach to fusion as creative director. In the output, you might not overtly see like a kind of computer running or a system, but the outcome is something that never would have happened without interacting with these systems. And I think that that is true augmentation. In my voice, I'm a centaur. Like my voice is able to do things, and I can perform in a way I couldn't without these machines. So it's very interesting for anyone listening. This term of being a centaur is a term that's used in chess, and I apply it to the arts, and other artists like Harry Herndon I've heard use this to apply to the arts. So I think it's already there. So that's my just like response to what you shared.
And do you think this idea of kind of our fascination with the human struggle and competition and, I guess, expressions, do you think that will kind of wipe out this idea that someone can be, let's say like a Banksy? I can be anonymous for my entire career. You'll never know who I am, and I can just output work, and you'll assign it to this human. But in the age of AI, does that kind of trick get kind of erased or made less effective?
It's so hard to say because I think there's always going to be people that just don't care. If they feel good, if they enjoy something, if it says it's human, it's human. If it's not, it's not. It's the experience. I think people will care about that a lot less. Um, but I mean, something that's really important to acknowledge is it's not spoken about enough, but Web3, like tokenization, will be the main cure to fake content. So the idea of this podcast, or if I was to release a piece, I have my wallet with my token, and you know that comes from me because of its blockchain based association. So even if there's a million existential, exponential expressions that have been generated from me, only stuff with my metadata is me, and I'm a human being. Where it gets confusing is, as you said, like I think if people won't know. I think it's going to be very mysterious, but we will absolutely have completely synthetic identities that are loved. People are in relationships with them, and artists that are some are attempting to be fully generative and general, which is the hardest, and most things will be augmented kind of avatars, identities that are enhanced, sort of changed, developed with these systems, and we really won't know what is what.
So a bit away from the art discussion, just talking about AI on its own. I'm sure you've heard a lot of the discussions and I guess the open letters signed by various luminaries in technology with regard to the risks of AI. Do you think about the risks? Do you, are they concerning to you? Do you feel like, I'm sure you've seen the Terminator movies. Do you feel like you're kind of like,
Yeah.
authoring your own doom, and maybe some, futuristic version of yourself will come back and warn you? Yeah, what,
Yeah.
you know, like what's, like, is there a singularity coming, and do you think it would, do you think it's dangerous? Like, do you think AI is dangerous?
Yes, I think that if you step away from the arts and you approach it like physics, so physics is dangerous. Like if you, the more you understand physics, what you're doing there is tapping into a universal intelligence of infinite power, and we have very clear examples of that, say with the nuclear bomb. Um, Intelligence is like physics. It's a revelatory process. It's something that is out there in the universe. It's not a human thing. Like human beings do not have a monopoly on intelligence. If you observe nature, it's a system that has output of power and influence. And these models, and especially when you get like really interesting generative adversarial networks that start at zero, there's no human input. It's just go. You send out an agent. The agent starts looking, and what it starts to mine is intelligence. It finds higher and higher resolutions of intelligence. What I think is arguable is intelligence is also like a ladder, and I think once these systems get a hold of something, Sam Harris calls it an intelligence explosion. I think there's definitely things that are outside of our control that will be of influence that will occur, and just that sentence on its own should send some warning signals. So you could argue, well, as an artist, why am I so deeply involved with these systems? Because I believe in AI literacy. I believe in raising awareness of the existence of these systems. I think that me using it as an artist to make something beautiful, in the same way as with physics, I could make something that has practical utility or like help people. Just because you're dealing in something that is so vast doesn't mean you as an individual can't find your own journey with it. So I found my own mission, but I think when we step outside of this aesthetic world and the short-term implications, humanity's path is going to be influenced by this, and we should be very, very careful.
Indeed. It's You've given TED Talks, and I was actually surprised. I saw you gave a speech, I believe, or a performance at the World Economic Forum at Davos, which is, for the, anyone listening, watching, you should know this is where a lot of the, world leaders congregate every year. When, and I'm sure you've befriended at least some of these people, when you're in contact with them, have they kind of indicated that they're aware of the importance of AI, and kind of like how the future needs to be crafted, specifically with regard to what you just said about AI literacy?
Oh, I mean, so that context specifically is a very intense environment. Yeah, and obviously it really divides people because it's associated with a lot of like global elites, which are there. But more, I was there as parts of the arts and culture team, so I contributed a lot of thinking and ideas to why I think these individuals should be supporting art, um, and especially art as a method of innovation. So I had a lot of heated debates and discussions about what is the function of art on a global problem-solving stage. But it wasn't just AI. Like in that environment, everything that's discussed comes with an anxiety and a concern. It's really a place where people are thinking we actually don't know the answers. People they give their answers, but the conversations that I've heard about AI are specifically its power, the fact that it could intensify class separation. I mean, some people have access to Chat GPT 3.5. Some people are paying £20 a month, and they have access to GPT-4. So already what you see there is a kind of pay to play kind of tap of intelligence. And when you have uh, that accessed globally, these are huge, huge questions. So whether it's the environment, artificial intelligence, like in that environment, say so with AI, with the United Nations, with the World Economic Forum, as an artist, like go into those environments because I'm really interested in uh, being a part of the conversation, especially my background where I grew up. Like it's crazy that I've ended up in those contexts just through the way that I think and just the fact that I think art is important. But yeah, there's huge anxiety, and we have to have conversations. We can't run away from this. We want to get into the rooms where people are making decisions and try to represent um, everyone. And that is a place where some very serious conversations happen, and AI is a huge, huge part of it.
Awesome. And I want to begin to wrap up, but before we wrap up, I want to ask you a very important question. I've been fascinated with the idea for many years myself, with the idea of transhumanism. And I look at augmented intelligence as part of that journey. Do you consider yourself a transhuman, assuming you already know what transhumans are?
Yeah, yeah, no. So for the audience, this would indicate that I am sort of in some way enhanced, or it's not a word I like, but changed. Like through my partnerships with technology, am I changed? The answer would be unequivocally yes. I am the way that I perform. You have to all take my word for it. Like my ability with my voice, and in terms of speed and range, and the just also the fascination of seeing human creativity from outside of the human perspective. Like I think it's a really interesting conversation. So these are words that have been applied to me, but post-human, augmented voice, an augmented human, and the transhuman one, I sometimes is more associated with some kind of hardware. I think people tend to have like they've experimented with that. Where for me, it's much more conceptual. Like I'm spending a lot of time thinking about how do we clearly define the line between what is like general human generative creativity, like with themselves, like with AI, and the very rare examples where which is slowly happening more and more, where something truly interventional happens. Something is happening in your creative practice or in the world's perception of, say, a game like chess that would never have been known without one of these systems coming in and showing it. So that applies to my voice. My voice has changed. The way I think about music has changed. The way I think about intelligence has changed. It's humbled me. Like it's really like to be around something that could be so powerful. And I think I try to embrace that. And I think everyone should take their own time. They should move with caution, but don't do this. Don't hide and shut yourself off because you'll be missing out on something very, very powerful and very, very present in the human journey.
I really want to thank you for joining us. Before we go, Teddy Riley, I saw his name involved in the
Yeah,
production.
different Teddy Riley,
Different.
different
Okay.
Teddy.
All right. I thought so. I was like, wait a minute. Um, so again, it's July. Your fusion is until July 8th
Mm.
in Leipzig, Germany. And what can you just give us like a website or social media where people can not only access you but maybe access the show?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions about the show or they're interested in my work, the best route is Instagram. So that is ReepsOne. So my DMs are open. We have to kind of share ideas and explore, and you can also find out about the ballet through my Instagram.
Awesome. Harry, I really appreciate you joining us. Thanks again. And I will be watching closely. I think you're on the cutting edge of art meets AI, and it's exciting. Thanks again.
Yeah, we'll play chess at some point.
That would be amazing. You'll probably destroy me, but I'm up for it. I'm up for it.
Yeah, awesome. All
Cheers.
right, cheers, guys.